It was not that long ago where we saw the San Francisco 49ers, and here we are once again as they get ready to go on their first road game of the season in a familiar place. That is the Skull. The Skull. The Skull. As they take on the Minnesota Vikings in their Week 2 matchup of this 2024 campaign. So, both of these teams fresh off a Week 1 victory. And in case you missed how these teams won their Week 1 games, I'll break it down to you very quickly, very briefly. Starting with my San Francisco 49ers. They actually closed out Week 1 like the closest they are. Like they get to bury Monday Night Raw into the ground, by the way. Anyway, for my 49ers, is the Jordan Mason show. Stepping up for an injured Christian McCaffrey, who was a surprise inactive right before the game started. But Jordan Mason, he had his number called, and he stepped up to the plate. He ran for over 100 yards. He scored a touchdown in the third quarter, and he was basically the engine of the whole for much of the offense for most of the game. Meanwhile, you had kicker Jake Moody notching more than half of the scoring in that game over Aaron Rodgers in the Jets, and they put on the rout 32-19 to close out Week 1. Meanwhile, for the Minnesota Vikings, a day earlier, you had a familiar name that some 49ers fans are familiar with. Backup quarterback turned starter Sam Darnold. He had himself a nice day in the Meadowlands in a familiar place. Yes, a familiar place that he saw ghosts. He went ghost a couple years ago, but it was on the big blue side of the Meadowlands this time, and he had a interesting turn, a reversal of direction, because this time he absolutely dissected the big blue giants. But let's be honest here, who wouldn't dissect the big blue giants? So anyway, he threw for 3 touchdowns, and the Minnesota Vikings defense notched 2 interceptions off of Daniel Jones, 1 for a pick 6 by Andrew Van Ginkel, and they got a route of their own on the G-Men, 28-6, and they pounded the pudding out of them in the Meadowlands. So both of these teams coming off big Week 1 victories, and now they get to see who gets the second one, who gets to go to 2-0 in US Bank Stadium in the Skull. So these two teams actually met each other last year in Week 7 in that Monday night game that really kind of ticked me off a little bit. It was a game that the 49ers should have won. They could have won, but unfortunately they didn't. I still really remember that pre-halftime play where they gave up that touchdown that they shouldn't have. But, it's in the past. It's in the past now. And here we are in the now, getting ready for this game. Interesting fact about this Minnesota Vikings team, for those of you unaware, they actually were not supposed to have Sam Darnold as the starting quarterback. Or actually, then again, maybe they were for at least a couple of games, while they were getting ready for their rookie quarterback, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, to start. Now, whether he was the original plan to start right away, or I don't know. Either way, this was supposed to be a year of what J.J. McCarthy was going to be about. Was he going to be the guy for Minnesota? But unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a year longer, because he's out for the year with a serious leg injury, which is unfortunate. So yeah, that's a shame. We won't get to see the 10th overall pick from Minnesota in this one against San Francisco or at all this year. But I mean, when you look at this Minnesota team, there's still a good amount of talent on this team, especially when you look at the offensive side of the ball. You have Justin Jefferson at receiver. You have Aaron Jones, who still can play running back relatively well. And then you have a couple other offensive weapons, despite a couple of them being injured right now at the moment when we talk about the injury report. Defensively, they have some serious playmakers that can make the Niners a little bit uncomfortable. Like Andrew Van Ginkel at linebacker, Harrison Smith at safety, and yeah, there are some serious playmakers on that side of the ball. I mean, let's not forget the 49ers, though, in contrast to where they were on that Monday night game in Minnesota last year. They're coming in somewhat mostly healthy. So actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the injury report going into this game. Starting with my San Francisco 49ers, they're a little banged up going into Minnesota, going on the road, flying all the way northeast. But at least there's a little bit of kind of optimism for a couple of people playing that are hoping to play in this game, like last week's inactives, edge rushers, Yuder Gross-Moss, and linebacker D. Winters. They returned to practice this week, but that doesn't really guarantee that they're going to play in this one. But at least it's progressing that they're getting healthy. And then you had a couple of casualties from last week's Monday night game, like Aaron Banks and Jawan Jennings, who actually left the game for a little bit before he came back. But they managed to participate in practice in a limited fashion. But we will see whether or not they play. And then a couple of key players, like key top players, like Talanoa Hufanga at safety. He's been progressing well in his rehab from the ACL injury last year he suffered. And he could make his season debut, but it's highly unlikely that he will. So they probably will wait until at least 1 more week or 2 more weeks when they come back home to play the Patriots. But again, honestly, there's not really much of a rush to bring him back. Speaking of a rush, Christian McCaffrey. He's been the big headline for the 49ers in terms of the injury department. He's been dealing with something called Achilles tendonitis. So like a nagging, if you want to be filthy casual about it, a nagging Achilles injury, a nagging calf injury, according to Kyle Shanahan. But he's been practicing, which has been good. So he's been practicing in a limited form. So he's not really doing a lot of intensive work from what I've been seeing. So he may or may not play. In my opinion, though, they should keep him out until they feel like he's truly healthy enough to go. So, I mean, it's what they do. What they have with Jordan Mason right now, it's fine. Like they should really run the rock, as long as they don't smell like some bad stuff. That's not cooking. Sorry for the bad pun. No, seriously, Jordan Mason, he proved on Monday night. As long as he can stay consistent, carry that over to Minnesota, Jordan Mason should carry the rock and smell the good rock, what's cooking. And yeah, carry that over to Minnesota. I know it'll be disappointing for Christian McCaffrey, but I think it's for the best. It seriously is for the best. Meanwhile, for the Minnesota Vikings, they have a couple of injuries of their own, like their second best receiver, Jordan Addison, who left Sunday's game early with an ankle injury. It's trending towards the direction that he's not going to play in this game because he hasn't practiced at any point. But, I mean, who knows? I'm recording this like 2 days before the practices are not going to be like anymore. Like, this is just like 3 days before the game. So, who knows? Who knows if he does come back to practice like on a Friday. But if he's not able to go, then third-year man Jalen Nailor, more on him when I talk about my last part of the video. Then Jalen Nailor is expected to take on a much bigger role. Center Garrett Bradbury on the offensive line, he practiced in a limited fashion, but I feel like he should be fine to go. And so should linebacker Van Ginkel, who popped up on Thursday with a foot issue. So even then, he should be fine to go. And then another surprise listing on the injury report on Thursday was safety Harrison Smith, who didn't practice with a hip injury. But we'll see how he feels on Friday when I can't really update you on that. But yeah, like we'll see how he is. In my opinion, though, I mean, if it's bad enough, then he can't go. But if it's not really anything, then he should be fine. So looking at something like keys to victory for both of these teams, for my 49ers, I mean, first game of the season on the road. I mean, you got to look for ways to get after your former backup, Sam Darnold. I mean, it's one game where he looked good against a bad team in the Giants. Now he has to play a real team in San Francisco. And the Niners know Sam Darnold well. They've been talking about it in these media interviews in the locker room. So it'll be interesting how they approach this game against their former backup, and it'll be on their front seven to attack a very solid offensive line and to get him going ghost like Danny Phantom again. But we'll see. Sam Darnold, he did okay against the Giants, but let's see how he does against the San Francisco defense. Meanwhile, for Brock Purdy on the offensive side of the ball, he had himself a somewhat quiet game in the opener. Regardless of what the stat line says, so this is where he should change that direction. Get him going early against a attackable Vikings secondary. So this is an opportunity for him to get him more involved early in the passing attack, especially if you're trying to get him more chemistry once again with Brandon Ayuk, and especially for Brandon Ayuk, who is still trying to reestablish himself, get him more comfortable again with Purdy. Meanwhile, for the Minnesota Vikings, from Sam Darnold's point of view, you got to spread the wealth on offense, especially with Justin Jefferson and then Jalen Naylor and then Aaron Jones in the short passing game. In terms of Naylor, he already has chemistry with Sam Darnold, like that goes back in the preseason, and Naylor is very likely going to take on a larger role should Jordan Addison not play in this game. And it's trending towards Jordan Addison not playing in this one. For the Vikings defense, it could be a nice game for them if they can get to Brock Purdy, because they have a very decent front seven. They've already gave Purdy trouble last year with the likes of Ivan Pace and Blake Cashman, and now you got these new additions with Jonathan Greenard of the Texans and then Van Ginkel. This group can challenge Purdy in the offensive line in some way. So if they can do that by creating pressure up front and then in the middle of the field, then they can have a chance in this one and make this a little more closer than you think. So, yeah, this can go either way. I'm expecting this personally to be, again, a little bit more closer than a lot of Niners fans are thinking. So, we'll see how this one goes. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to watch this game live as it happens because I'm going to be on a camping trip and I'm going to be coming home from it. So, I'll be away from that and at least enjoying myself a little bit. So, let me know your predictions for this game. Let me know your takes and how you're feeling about this Week 2 matchup between the 49ers and the Minnesota Vikings. And let's keep the faith going, even if we can be a little bit critical, filthy casual about it, about my 49ers. But hey, we want them to keep improving, right? Anyway, until we do the recap of it, until we keep talking about some Niners football once again, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge on the world of sports. This has been Dylan Lasagna signing out of another 49ers video here on Very Cold Lasagna. And as always, peace out.